Okay, have you ever walked into a meeting and felt totally unprepared?
Uh, yeah, I think we've all been there.
Right. Like especially when it comes to commercial real estate. It can feel very intimidating.
Definitely. It's a world with its own language and rules.
Exactly. And one term that I've heard but never fully understood is BOMA standards. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, absolutely. BOMA standards are kind of the backbone of commercial real estate measurement.
Okay, see that's what I need. What are they? What is BOMA?
So BOMA stands for the Building Owners and Managers Association,
Okay.
and they've created this really detailed system for measuring commercial space. Like everyone's got to be on the same page.
Makes sense. So it's not just measuring the length and width of a room.
No, no, it's way more comprehensive than that. It takes into account all these different factors like the shared spaces in a building, ceiling heights, the type of property you're dealing with.
Whoa, so it gets pretty complex, but why? Why does it even matter so much? Is it just about calculating rent?
Rent's a big part of it, for sure, but it goes way beyond that. Think of it this way. Imagine you're a landlord, right? And you own a big office building. Without BOMA, you could easily, maybe unknowingly, undercharge a tenant.
You mean they're getting more space than they're paying for?
Exactly. Even by a small amount, like 50 square feet.
Wow, okay. So 50 square feet, I can see how that could slip through the cracks.
But over a 5-year lease,
Oh, that adds up.
yeah, that could be thousands of dollars in lost revenue for you. And on the flip side, if you overcharge a tenant, you could end up in a legal dispute, right? Nobody wants that.
No, no, legal battles are the worst. So BOMA kind of helps everyone stay honest.
Exactly. It makes sure everything is transparent, fair, and accurate. Protects both landlords and tenants.
I like that. So is this just a North American thing, or is BOMA used more widely?
Actually, that's one of the coolest things about BOMA standard. They're recognized internationally. In fact, BOMA has been super involved in developing what's called IPMS, International Property Measurement Standards.
Oh, wow. So there's a global movement towards standardizing real estate measurements.
Absolutely. And BOMA is at the forefront of that effort.
Wow. Okay, so we've established that BOMA standards are important, but let's dig a little deeper. What are the actual benefits beyond avoiding financial pitfalls and legal issues?
Well, one of the biggest benefits is that it can actually increase your property value. Think about it. When you're selling a property, buyers want to know exactly how much usable space they're getting. A BOMA certification provides that assurance.
So it's like a seal of approval saying this property's measurements are legit.
Right. And that can make your property more attractive to buyers and potentially even increase its market value. And this also ties into legal protection. Like if there's ever a dispute over the size of a space, a BOMA report can be used as evidence in court.
Oh, smart. So it's like having a legally binding document. I like it. Okay, but let's back up a second because I always get confused by this. Rentable versus usable square footage. Can you explain that to me? I'm 5.
Okay, so usable square footage is pretty straightforward. It's the area within a leased space that you can actually use. The space enclosed by the walls where you put your desks and chairs.
Got it. So usable is pretty much like occupied space.
Right. Now, rentable is a little different. It includes the usable area plus a portion of the shared spaces in the building, like the hallways, the lobbies, elevators, restrooms, those sorts of things.
Oh, okay. So I'm essentially paying for a share of those common areas, even though they're not technically mine.
Exactly. And BOMA provides a clear method for calculating how much of that shared space each tenant is responsible for, making it fair for everyone.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like we were saying earlier about staying honest and transparent. Okay, I'm starting to get it. But let's say I need to get a BOMA measurement done for my property. What does that actually look like? Do I just call someone up and have them come wander around with a measuring tape?
Uh-huh. Not quite. It's a lot more sophisticated than that. You'd want to work with a qualified professional who specializes in BOMA measurements. They're kind of like the forensic scientists of square footage.
Forensic scientists of square footage. Love it. Okay, so they use fancy tools and
Oh,
stuff?
yeah, like laser scanners and 3D modeling software to capture every nook and cranny of the space.
Yeah.
It's a very meticulous process.
Wow, that's impressive. Okay, let's say I'm a business owner who's looking to lease some office space. How can I use my knowledge of BOMA standards to my advantage?
That's a great question. When you're comparing different spaces, pay close attention to the BOMA certified measurements. It shows that the landlord is committed to transparency and accuracy, right?
Yeah, I can see how that would be reassuring. They're not trying to pull a fast one on me.
Exactly. And it can help you avoid unexpected costs. Imagine signing a lease based on a non-BOMA measurement, and later you realize you're paying for less space than you thought.
Oof, yeah, that would be bad. So BOMA can actually help me save money in the long run.
Absolutely. It's about empowering yourself to make smart real estate decisions.
This is so insightful. I feel like I'm finally starting to speak the language of commercial real estate. But hold on a second, I have another question. Besides measurements, what else does BOMA do? I noticed their website has a ton of resources.
Yeah, great point. BOMA's involved in a whole lot more than just measurement. They do a ton of advocacy work, education programs, research, even have a yearly awards program that recognizes innovation in the field.
So they're like a one-stop shop for all things commercial real estate.
Pretty much. They're a really valuable resource for anyone involved in the industry.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today, but there's one thing I'm still curious about. I was reading up on the BOMA retail standard, and it sounds like it's a bit different from the other standards.
It is. Retail spaces have their own unique quirks, and the retail standard addresses those head on.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
For example, it provides specific guidance on measuring storefronts, kiosks, food courts, things you wouldn't find in an office building.
Oh, that makes sense. So it's tailored to the challenges of measuring retail spaces.
Exactly. It's super comprehensive and user-friendly, and it really benefits both landlords and tenants in the retail sector.
Okay, this is all so fascinating. I'm already starting to see how understanding BOMA standards can be a game changer, no matter what side of the commercial real estate world you're on. But I think we need to take a break for now. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our BOMA deep dive.
We have, but there's still plenty more to explore, so make sure to tune in for the next part where we'll unpack even more about BOMA standards and how they impact the industry.
You won't want to miss it. Stay tuned.
Welcome back.
Okay, so last time we really dug into what BOMA standards are and why they're so important.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground.
But there's so much more to explore. Like, I'm really interested in the whole maximizing revenue thing. I mean, who doesn't want to boost their profits, right?
Right, and BOMA can definitely play a role in that.
Okay, so how exactly do accurate BOMA measurements lead to more money in my pocket?
Well, for starters, you're making sure you're charging the appropriate rent for every single square foot of space.
Right, we talked about that earlier, like avoiding accidental undercharges.
Exactly, but it goes beyond that.
Oh.
BOMA can help you actually optimize your entire leasing strategy.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more.
So imagine you have a big office building with lots of different tenants.
Okay, yeah.
By using BOMA to accurately measure and allocate the shared spaces, you're ensuring that each tenant is paying their fair share.
Oh, I see. So you're not leaving any money on the table.
Exactly. You're maximizing your rental income. And it's not just about squeezing every last penny out of tenants. It actually helps you build better relationships with them.
Because it's fair.
Exactly. Transparency and fairness lead to happier tenants, and happier tenants are more likely to renew their leases.
Makes sense. They're not going to feel like they're getting ripped off.
Right. But I know we talked about shared spaces and load factor before, but I'm still a little fuzzy on how it all works.
Me too, honestly. Can we go back to that?
Sure. Remember the pizza analogy from last time?
Yeah, the pizza cutter.
Exactly. Think of the load factor as the pizza cutter.
Hmm.
You needed to get your slice right.
Right.
Well, tenants need those shared spaces, hallways, lobbies, restrooms to access and use their individual units.
Yeah.
The load factor is basically the percentage of the building's total area that's dedicated to those common areas.
So a higher load factor means more shared space.
Right. Which means tenants are paying for a larger portion of those common areas.
Got it. So if I'm a tenant, I'd want a lower load factor, right? To keep my costs down.
Well, it depends. A lower load factor might mean lower costs, but it could also mean fewer amenities. Maybe there's no fancy gym or rooftop terrace.
Oh, that's a good point. So it's a trade-off.
Exactly. And that's where BOMA comes in. It helps you evaluate those trade-offs and make informed decisions that align with your needs and your budget.
Okay, so it's not just about measuring, it's about making smart choices. I like that. Okay, so we've covered how BOMA impacts revenue and leasing, but what about the big picture? How does it affect a property's overall value?
That's where BOMA really shines. When you're buying or selling a property, accurate BOMA measurements are crucial for determining its true market value.
So it's like BOMA gives you the official appraisal.
You got it. Potential buyers want to know exactly how much rentable space they're getting for their investment, and a BOMA certification provides that assurance.
So it takes the guesswork out of it.
Exactly. And it makes the whole transaction much smoother and more transparent.
And I bet lenders like it too, right? When they're deciding whether to give you a loan.
Absolutely. Lenders want to know that the property is accurately valued and that there's no risk of hidden discrepancies.
It's all about minimizing risk, which is what BOMA is all about.
Right. And remember how we talked about BOMA providing legal protection?
Yeah, that was interesting. Tell me more about that.
Imagine a tenant disputes their rentable square footage.
Oh, yeah, that sounds like a headache.
It can be. But if you have a BOMA report, you have a neutral third-party verification of those measurements.
So it's like having an unbiased referee.
Exactly. It can help resolve disputes quickly and fairly, saving everyone a lot of stress and legal fees.
BOMA is like the ultimate peacemaker in the commercial real estate world.
I like that.
Okay, so we've talked about revenue, valuation, legal protection. Seriously, I'm starting to think BOMA standards should be mandatory.
Uh-huh. Well, they certainly make things a lot easier.
They do. But tell me, how are these standards actually created? Is there like a secret society of measurement gurus who meet in a dark room and decide these things?
Uh-huh. Not quite. But BOMA does have a dedicated committee that's responsible for developing and updating the standards.
So it's a pretty rigorous process.
Very rigorous. They do tons of research, gather industry feedback, and carefully consider best practices. It's not just some people making up rules as they go along.
That's good to know. So they're constantly reviewing and updating the standards.
All the time. They're looking at new building designs, new technologies, legal precedents. They want to make sure the standards stay relevant and effective.
It's like they're future-proofing the industry.
In a way, yes. They're anticipating the needs of the market and making sure BOMA can adapt to those changes.
That's impressive. Okay, we talked earlier about the International Property Measurement Standards Coalition, or IPMS. Can you remind me how BOMA fits into that?
Sure. So for a long time, different countries had their own way of measuring space.
Which sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It definitely created a lot of confusion and inconsistency, especially with global real estate becoming more and more common.
Right, it's like trying to build a piece of furniture from IKEA using instructions in a different language.
Uh-huh, exactly.
Mm.
But luckily, things are changing. IPMS is working to create one globally recognized set of standards that everyone can use.
So it's like the United Nations of property measurement.
You got it. And BOMA has been actively involved in developing those IPMS standards, ensuring that they align with North American practices.
So it's a collaborative effort to make the global real estate market more unified and transparent.
Exactly. Less confusion, fewer disputes, smoother transactions. It's a win-win for everyone.
Okay, but what about people who are already familiar with BOMA standards? Do they need to learn a whole new system?
No, not really. BOMA has done a great job of incorporating IPMS principles and methodologies into its own standards.
So it's an evolution, not a revolution.
Right. And they've provided tons of resources and training to help people understand the changes.
That's good to know. So even though there might be some differences, BOMA and IPMS are ultimately working towards the same goal.
Absolutely. Greater consistency and transparency in property measurement around the world.
This is all so insightful. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of the commercial real estate world.
I'm glad to hear that.
Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, can we just recap what we've learned today?
Sure. What are the key takeaways that stand out to you?
Well, we started by talking about how BOMA can help property owners maximize revenue, optimize their leasing strategies.
Right. We also dug deeper into load factor and how it impacts rental costs.
Oh, and we talked about how BOMA impacts property valuation, making it easier for buyers and sellers to agree on a fair price.
And don't forget about the legal protection BOMA provides. It can really help prevent and resolve disputes.
True. And we talked about how those BOMA standards are created and maintained, and how BOMA is working with IPMS to create a more unified global real estate market.
It's been a whirlwind tour of BOMA.
It has, but I feel like our listeners are armed with a lot more knowledge now.
I hope so. They're ready to navigate the world of commercial real estate measurement.
They are, but we're not done yet. We still need to see how these BOMA standards are applied in different types of properties.
Right. Offices, retail spaces, industrial properties, they all have their own unique characteristics.
So stay tuned for the final part of our BOMA deep dive, where we'll explore those different property types in detail. Okay, so we spent the last 2 episodes really getting into the nitty-gritty of BOMA standards.
We have a lot of info.
It's a lot, but I feel like I'm finally starting to understand the lingo of commercial real estate.
That's great. It's a whole new language almost.
It is. But now I'm curious to see how these standards actually play out in different types of properties, like we talked about. Offices, retail, industrial.
Yeah, let's get into the real-world application.
So let's start with the most familiar one, office buildings.
Okay, great. Office buildings are kind of the classic example when we talk about BOMA.
Right. So what makes them unique when it comes to measuring space?
Well, one of the key differences is the amount of shared space. Think about all the lobbies, hallways, elevators, restrooms.
Yeah, all the areas that tenants use to get around the building.
Exactly. And those common areas can take up a significant chunk of the building's total square footage.
Right. So how does BOMA handle that?
The BOMA office standard has a very specific methodology for allocating a fair share of those common areas to each tenant. So nobody's paying for space they're not actually using.
I see. So it's all about being fair and transparent.
Absolutely, it prevents any disputes or misunderstandings down the road.
Okay, let's say I'm a business owner looking for office space. How can I use this knowledge to my advantage?
Well, first of all, always make sure your lease agreement clearly states the rentable square footage and that it's based on a BOMA certified measurement.
Oh, so it's not enough to just see a number on a piece of paper.
Right. You want to see that BOMA seal of approval. It gives you the peace of mind that the space has been measured correctly according to industry standards.
Got it. So what else should I be looking for?
Don't forget that load factor we talked about. Remember, the higher the load factor, the more shared space you're paying for.
Right, right. So should I always aim for the lowest load factor possible?
Not necessarily. It depends on the building and what amenities are included. A higher load factor could mean a nicer gym, a rooftop deck, maybe even a shared co-working space. It's a trade-off.
So I need to weigh the costs and benefits.
Exactly. And that's where your understanding of BOMA comes in handy. It helps you make informed decisions.
Okay, that makes sense. We've talked
Yeah.
a lot about tenants, but what about landlords? How does BOMA help them?
BOMA is crucial for landlords because it helps them maximize the value of their property. Accurate measurements mean they can charge appropriate rents, attract quality tenants, and minimize the risk of disputes.
So it's a win-win for everyone.
Exactly. It creates a more stable and transparent real estate market.
I love it. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about retail spaces. Those seem like they'd be tricky to measure.
They can be. Retail spaces come in all shapes and sizes, from tiny kiosks to huge department stores.
Right, and they often have weird layouts and stuff.
Yeah, and that's where the BOMA retail standard comes in. It provides very specific guidelines for measuring all those different types of spaces.
So it's like they've thought of everything.
Pretty much. They cover storefronts, display windows, common areas, back-of-house spaces. It's very comprehensive.
Okay, so whether I'm renting a small boutique or a giant department store, BOMA has me covered.
You got it. It ensures everyone is playing by the same rules and that measurements are fair and accurate.
I'm really starting to see how much thought and detail goes into these BOMA standards.
There's a lot to it, for sure.
Okay, one last type of property I want to touch on. Industrial. Those seem like a whole different ballgame.
They are. Industrial properties like warehouses and factories have their own unique challenges when it comes to measurement.
Yeah, they're usually massive spaces with high ceilings and all sorts of equipment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the BOMA Industrial Standard addresses those specific challenges. For example, it provides guidelines for measuring loading docks, mezzanines, even overhead cranes.
Wow, they really thought of everything.
They did. And another important factor in industrial spaces is clear height. That's the vertical distance from the floor to the lowest hanging obstruction.
Clear height. Okay. Why is that important?
It's crucial for tenants who need to stack pallets, store large equipment, or operate machinery. They need to know they have enough vertical space to work with.
Oh, I see. So BOMA makes sure that information is clear and upfront.
Right. No surprises down the line, just transparency and accuracy.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
Mhm.
From offices to retail to industrial, we've seen how BOMA standards impact every corner of the commercial real estate world.
We have. It's been quite a deep dive.
It really has. And I feel like our listeners are now equipped with the knowledge they need to navigate this complex world with confidence.
I hope so. It's all about understanding the rules of the game and using them to your advantage.
Exactly. So whether you're a tenant, a landlord, an investor, or just someone who's curious about commercial real estate, remember, BOMA is your friend.
BOMA is definitely your friend.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. It's been a pleasure. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you found this deep dive into BOMA standards informative and empowering. Keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those BOMA standards in mind.